Good evening, everyone. For those of you on the East Coast, and good afternoon for those of you on the West Coast. My name is Charlie Dobens. I'm here to talk to you today in the series of our free webinar series for the Multifamily Investing Academy. Tonight's topic, as you can see here, is knowing the expense ratios and the rules of thumb on a multifamily property. The whole point of this is to show you how you can evaluate a deal within a very short amount of time, sometimes as much as a minute, and you'll be able to figure out exactly whether that you've got yourself a deal or whether the broker is just trying to pull wool over your eyes. So let me just give you a little bit of a background. We have over 270 people are signed up for tonight's talk, so some of you don't know who I am. Some of you are clients and mentoring students of mine. I'd like to welcome you. I am an attorney. My law practice, you can find more information about me at dobenslaw.com. My entire law practice is focused on working with multifamily investors. I help them through the entire acquisition process. I take them from the evaluation of the deal to helping them find the deals, to negotiating the deals, to making offers, getting them under contract, taking them through the due diligence process, and bringing them up to the transition to closing. I'm also the founder of the Multifamily Investing Academy. That is my educational arm. That's where I sell my products. That's where I go out and do all my seminar speaking, and that is an awful lot of fun for me. Just to give you a little bit of an overview, I also own and operate, I have owned and operated over $20 million of property. Right now we're about to acquire another 200 units. I have worked, as I said, in addition to owning this property, we've also started our own property management company, so we do the property management on our own, which I also help my students and clients to do the same, because I firmly believe that that is the way that you're going to be able to get the best return for your product, because nobody loves your baby as much as you do. You can find out more about me by going to Dobens Law. You can also find out more about the Multifamily Investing Academy by going there. You can see I've got, for those of you new to those two sites, if you go to the Multifamily Investing Academy, you can download the new ebook, 25 Mistakes That New Investors Make, and how to make sure you're not making the 26th. And also you can click on the events button and you'll see all the places that I'm speaking in the upcoming year. You can click on the Shark Tank and you can find out about our seminar that we've got coming up. I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that in a moment. And then also the Multifamily Investing Academy Mastermind program for those of you that like to remain in the game. Maybe you're not ready yet to start making offers. Maybe you're not ready yet to start doing things, but you want to keep your education going on a regular basis. I highly recommend that you get involved in the Multifamily Investing Academy Mastermind program. Now, our goal through the MFIA is to help you get that property. So many times you'll get started, you know, everybody wants to own an apartment building. If you're on this phone call today, that's probably why you're here. And so many people just they get started and they get frustrated and they fall down, or they find some great deal and they can't jump through the hoops that the sellers are putting up in front of you every day to prevent you or to weed out those people that can't do the deal. What we've done on our end is tried to come up with all the different solutions for you to make sure that you are able to jump through all those hoops. We have things for our mentoring students, such as our earnest money deposit program, where we have introduce you to other investors who can front you the earnest money deposit to make the deal happen. We are now starting to put together a group of qualified sponsors for those investors that get that deal under contract. They want to own it, but they just don't have the real estate resume in order to pull the trigger. We are putting together enough sponsors that will want to be your sponsor. You know, obviously it depends upon the deal. We can't promise you anything, but it's definitely something that you want to understand a little bit better. That's what we teach at our Shark Tank events. Now, tonight's topic is knowing the expense ratios and the rules of thumb on the multifamily properties. you know, you really only need to know two things to be able to do this. You need to know the type of property that we're dealing with, that you're looking at, or you need to know the expense ratio of the property. If you know one, you can figure out the other one. If you don't know the other one, if you know, and vice versa, so if you know the type of property that it is, you should be able to easily figure out what the expense ratio is. If you know what the expense ratio is, it should automatically tell you what type of property you're dealing with. It's that simple. And so make sure you have pens and papers, notes ready to take, because I'll be giving you these rules of thumb and these ratios and how they fall in line with different types of property, so that by the end of this conversation, you'll know exactly within 2 minutes whether this guy is showing you a great deal or whether the broker is just blowing smoke. So let's get started, but first we've got to get some nomenclature down here. We've got to get some understanding on some terminology. Let's talk first about types of property. Essentially, if you're new, you know, obviously because we've got over 200 people on this call, I'm going to speak as if, you know, you don't know anything. So I'm talking to the lowest common denominator here, whoever it is. And I know somebody's sitting there thinking that I'm talking to them. I probably am not. But here goes. We deal with 4 levels of property. We call them A, B, C, and D. Each one has their own criteria. Each one has their own benefits and drawbacks. And now, when you're in this business, you're going to need to know what each type of property looks like. Give me an example. Class A property typically has been built in the last 10 years. It typically has only had one owner. Maybe the guy that built it is now the owner, and now he's looking to sell that property. Typically with a Class A property, you're talking about tenant-paid utilities. Now, I'm going to keep stressing that. Now, with a Class A property, you've got things like higher quality residents. Well, when you get higher quality residents, they pay their bills, which means you're going to have lower delinquencies. You're going to have lower economic vacancy. So Class A property are the really nice properties. They're the kind that you would want to live in. Now, Class B properties tend to be those built in the mid-1980s to within 10 years ago. They tend to have also tenant-paid utilities, and they have not quite A-level residents, slightly lower, so you're starting to see the delinquency and the economic vacancy start to go up. Now, when you're dealing with C-class properties, these are properties built before 1985. They tend to have a lower grade resident, and they tend to always be, and I know that you're not supposed to speak in absolutes here. There's an exception to every rule except for one, but the absolute here that I'm going to try to stress is that Class C properties tend to always be all bills paid properties. Now, what do I mean by all bills paid? That means that the tenant isn't paying the utilities, the landlord is paying the utilities. That means that when the utility bills go up, it comes out of the landlord's pocket and not the resident's. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not going to get into it in depth whatsoever, but just understand that when you're looking at a Class C property, you're looking at an all bills paid property versus a tenant paid property. So if you're looking at an all bills paid property, you know you're probably looking at a Class C property. It just works. It's the same grouping. I'm trying to think of the geometric term, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. And the final group here are Class D properties. These are war zones. These are bombed out neighborhoods. These are what we call non-cap rate sales. I'm going to get back into that expression in a little bit further down in our discussion, but I want you to understand that terminology so that when you see that terminology, you know exactly what the broker's talking about. Or you can use that terminology to the broker and you end up sounding like a genius. Here's what I mean. We call Class D properties non-cap rate sales because most of the time they are non-performing assets, meaning that the net operating income is zero. There's not enough income to pay all the expenses, so your NOI is zero. Now, you all know the formula for valuing a property. The net operating income over the purchase price equals the cap rate. Well, if the numerator is zero, that means the cap rate is going to be zero. And that's why we call it a non-cap rate sale. So Class D properties are non-cap rate sales. They're non-performing assets. Now, just understand one thing. What is the one thing that can turn a Class A property into a Class D property? What is that one thing? Listening to all the voices out there, the answer is very simple. It's father time. It takes time. How do you take an A-class property and make it a D? Just sit back and wait. Over time, those properties start to become obsolete. They start to break down. They start to suffer. The neighborhoods start to go. The neighborhoods change. And that property that was once a Class A has now fallen into disrepair, and it's now a Class D. Because just think about it here for a second. Nobody walks into an architect's office and says, I would like you to design the plans for me for a Class D office apartment building. He's going to look at you and say, I can't do it. Not only I can't do it because we can't even create the materials needed to create a Class D property. They don't even make them anymore. That's how old these properties are. So that is the one thing that takes a Class A property to a Class D. And it hits every letter grade all the way down the line. Now, on the flip side, let's think about it this way. What are the two things that you need to turn a Class D property into a Class A? Now, I'm using as an example kind of an extreme here from going from a Class A to a Class D to a Class A. Many times I hear people come and say, well, I'm looking for a Class C in a B area or a B in an A area. Well, let's illustrate the absurdity here by going from a Class D to a Class A. What are the two things that you need in order to make a Class D, to reposition a Class D property into a Class A? The first one is easy and everybody should have the answer right. It is money. You can turn any property, any D-class property, from an ugly pig to a beautiful, beautiful calf with just money. You can walk in there and you can put granite countertops in the kitchens. You can redo everything. You can do a gut rehab. You can, if you've got enough dough, you can make that thing look beautiful. But does it mean that your repositioning is going to be a success? Not unless you have that second element. And do you know what that second element is to make a repositioning successful? That is the Class A customers. You have to be able to convince those people who tend to rent in Class A space to move into your Class D rehab. And I was on the internet and I typed in images for rich people, and these two popped up. And I thought, okay, fine, we'll use these two as an example of people looking to move from, who tend to live in the A-class properties. Perfect example. But the thing is, if they don't make the move, even though you've got granite countertops and the place is absolutely gorgeous, you got jacuzzis, you got marble in the bathroom, if these two young ladies will not move into your repositioned property, your repositioning is a failure. Okay, so just understand how these letter grades work. That's the whole purpose of this discussion up to this point, is to understand the two things. First off is the type of property. All right, and just to show you that I'm an equal opportunity offender here, my other alternative picture was going to be this one. Silly poor people, money is for rich people. So just don't think I'm all on one side here. Okay, let's talk about a little bit more nomenclature. What we talked about before, the types of properties. Now let's start getting into the expense ratios, and you're going to see how these two things come together by the end of this conversation. All right. First off, let's talk about the definition of expense ratios. It's very simple. You take the total expenses and you divide it by the total income, and it is expressed as a percentage. Now, understand what I'm saying here by total income. I'm including all income on the property, not just the rental income. All right, so you're going to make sure you can include all of the income. You got the rental income, then you've got the other sources of income like laundry income, application fees, all those types of things. We add them all together, and that's your total income. That becomes your denominator in the equation, and this is how you come up with your expense ratio. Now, let's have a little bit of a sidebar because I'm going to go a little bit off the reservation here, but it is something that I really want to stress with you. I have this conversation in my seminars all the time, and I can't stress it enough, okay? It has to do with pro formas. You would not imagine how many times I'm working with new investors, and they always go for the pro forma numbers and say, look how great this deal is. Look at these numbers. They are fantastic. And you look at them and like, where are you getting these numbers from? Oh, I'm getting them from the broker's offering memorandum. Well, do they say pro forma on them? Well, yeah, as a matter of fact, they do. Well, let me tell you something, folks. A broker's pro forma numbers exist in only one place. It's a place that you will never get to. It's a place where everyone pays their rent on time every month. It just doesn't exist in the real world. So instead of calling it, the broker's numbers, we call that place pro forma. Okay, so next time a broker tries to sell you on his numbers, just remember that there's no place in the world that this building exists based upon these numbers. Just remember, you heard it here first, that place is called pro forma. So, all right, having said that, when do you use the pro forma numbers? You actually, whoops, pardon me, let me go back one. Let me go back one. When do you use pro forma numbers? There are times when you actually do use the broker's pro forma numbers, and that is when the broker's pro forma numbers are worse than what you are actually seeing that this owner actually paid. Perfect example, taxes. If you see that the seller paid $100,000 in taxes, but next year the broker says it's going to be $150 on his pro forma, you use the $150. If he says that the vacancy is going to go up next year, you use his vacancy numbers. So always use those numbers to the broker's disadvantage. Use his pro forma numbers to his disadvantage, but never, ever believe that if they look the same, they're going to remain the same. A perfect example is, the flip side of taxes. How many times do you look at the broker, the person paid $100,000 in taxes this year, and the broker's pro forma says next year they're going to pay $100,000 in taxes? Where in the world do taxes remain the same every year? I've never lived there. It's pro forma. It doesn't exist. So make sure that you use the right numbers and not the broker's pro forma numbers, okay? Now, let's get back to correctly analyzing a property within 5 minutes, just using the property type and the expense ratio. Okay, so here are the rules of thumb. Write these down and commit these to memory. Write these in a notepad so that you can keep them by your book. Whenever your broker sends you over a property package that you're looking at, apply these rules to that property and you'll never go wrong. Okay? Now, there are going to be caveats. I'm going to go through the caveats at the end of this, the next 4 slides, so you have a better understanding of exactly what I'm talking about. But let's run through these. First off, Class A property, nicest property to own, easiest property to own. The expense ratios for Class A properties are between 35% to 45%. Remember, we're talking about 10-year-old properties. We're talking about properties that have very low repairs and maintenance. And then, we're talking about properties that don't have to pay a lot in utilities because the tenants are all paying the utilities. We're talking about properties that have very low delinquencies and very low collections. So therefore, these properties are going to be the most cost-effective to run. So we tend to show the expense ratio between 35 and 45. Now you might think to yourself, wow, Charlie, that's a pretty big spread. Can you get it tighter? And I'll explain why I'm using that spread when we get to the first caveat, okay? Now, Class B properties, we tend to see between 45 to 60% expense ratio. Now, we're talking about older properties. You're starting to see more things go wrong. You're starting to see you're having to replace the furnaces and the air conditioning units. You're starting to see that the tenants are not as good. The expense ratio, the vacancy ratio, the delinquency ratio, the economic vacancy ratio is starting to go up. You're seeing, 60% is very much the high end of the expense ratio. I tend to see these numbers go between 45 and 55%. And remember, Class B properties tend to be tenant-paid utilities. If you get a property, the broker is telling you it's a Class B property and it's an all bills paid property, that's not right. I'm not going to buy the broker's analysis of that property being considered a Class B property. All right, now Class C property, remember, higher repairs and maintenance, 1970s construction. Everything is falling apart, that was built back in the 1970s. It's going to be an all bills paid property. And remember, because everything is falling apart, the expense ratios are going to be high. The repairs and maintenance bill is going to be higher. And when the repairs and maintenance bill is higher, that means that the payroll is going to be higher. So that's why we're seeing expense ratios much higher on the Class Cs, from 61% to as high as 75%. Now, remember, we talked about Class D. I explained about the expense ratios are non-existent on Class D properties. It's a non-cap rate sale. So don't even worry about expense ratios. All you're trying to figure out on a Class D property is this something that I can rehab, reposition, get in and get out of very quickly. All right, but that is not going to be what we're going to be talking about here today. So let me talk to you about the caveats for these deals. Caveat number 1 is you have to know your geography. Now remember, I said Class A property, the expense ratio can be between 35 and 45%. Why is it so big? Well, think about it this way. And we're going to talk about insurance costs in just a moment. Insurance costs differ depending upon where the property is. Insurance costs in Oklahoma City are a lot less than they are 2 streets back from the ocean in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Huge difference. You can go from $180 per unit per year in Oklahoma City to $600 per unit per year in Fort Lauderdale. So that in and of itself, if you put the exact same type of property in those 2 different areas, your expense ratio is going to have a huge swing, not because of the type of property, but because of the geography that you're in and the market that those properties are in, the insurance market that those properties are in. So it's very important that you understand the market that you're in. When you're sitting down and you're really crunching numbers with a property accountant and you're trying to evaluate whether the deal is a good one or not, what we do in determining the expense ratio is we will carve out those elements of the expenses that are most geographically centered. That is the insurance and the taxes. When we take those two out, then we can start to look at these properties more on a level playing field. But in this particular analysis, I'm just giving you the quick down and dirty on how to figure this out. So when you're looking at property, you've got to know if my area is Oklahoma City, what's my insurance expenses should be? What should my insurance expenses be, and does that impact, how is that impacting what the deal that the broker is showing me is all about? So keep in mind the geography. Now, the next thing I want you to think about is that all bills paid versus the tenant paid utilities. Okay? If a broker shows you a property, a C-class property, and so right away you're thinking to yourself, okay, Charlie told me the C-class property is 61% to 75% expense ratio. What is this broker showing me? Let me see your paperwork. Okay, you're showing 55%. Wait a minute, you're way low. What's going on here? Is this truly an all bills paid utility property? If it's an all bills paid property, I'm telling you folks, you're not going to see an expense ratio at 55%. It just doesn't work. The utilities have gone through the roof in the last couple of years. So if this guy is trying to tell you that the property is a 55% expense ratio, C-class, all bills paid, blow the whistle on this guy, because that's not right. Those numbers don't fly. So you've got to really understand, is this truly an all bills paid property, or is it a tenant paid utilities property? Now, what happens if the numbers don't match up? What happens if the guy shows you a property and you compare my expense ratios and they don't jive? Do you just throw the deal out the window? No. You go into the expenses. That's the easiest place to start to figure out what's going on. You start looking at the expenses and you compare them to these rules of thumb that I'm about to give you. Now understand that all of these rules of thumb are going to be given to you in a per unit, per year basis. All right, write that down right now, because I'm not going to come back to that. I'm going to run through these rules of thumb on a, per $100, and it's all going to be done on a per unit, per year cost. So here's the first one. Your insurance costs. Your insurance costs can run anywhere from $200 to $600 per unit per year. If you're looking in Arizona, Phoenix, Arizona, you should pick up the phone and get to know an insurance broker that does business in Arizona and ask them, what does it typically cost to insure a property like this one in that marketplace? He'll give you a very accurate number right away. So use his numbers. If that is the market that you are focusing in, know your geography, know your market. And that way you can always figure out, where is my rule of thumb for insurance costs in this particular area? Is it the $200 range? Is it the $600 range? I'm going to tell you, folks, it blew me away when we were looking at a deal in Fort Lauderdale. When I saw that per unit cost of, it was almost $600 per unit per year for insurance. Now just think about that. That drives down your NOI, which drives down the value of your property, all because of insurance. What happened in that Florida insurance market is just unbelievable. So keep that in mind. You've got to understand exactly what your rules of thumb are for your insurance costs, depending upon the market that you're looking at. Now, repairs and maintenance. Repairs and maintenance are going to run between $400 to $800 per unit per year. Why the big spread? If you're looking at an A-class property, you can expect them to be closer to the $400. If you're looking at the C-class properties, $800 might be too low. Depending on how bad that property is, you might be seeing repairs and maintenance numbers above $800 per unit per year. But if you're looking at an A-class property and you see that the guy spent $800 per unit per year last year on repairs and maintenance, there's something wrong there. My first inclination, if I saw that, would be that maybe they mischaracterized some of those expenses, and they should be capital expenditures and taken out of the income and expense statement. Because if I see $800 on what the broker is telling me is a Class A property, I got to raise my hand and say, I'm sorry, Mr. Broker, but that just doesn't sound right. What's wrong with this property? A Class A property should not be spending that much money on repairs and maintenance. A Class C property that is spending $400 a year on per unit per year for repairs and maintenance, that guy's bleeding that property dry. You cannot tell me that a C-class property can be maintained for $400 per unit per year. It just can't be done. Things break on those properties like you can't imagine. So understand, when you look at these rules of thumb and you compare them to the property type, they will make total sense to you when you understand how these properties live and breathe, and they really do live and breathe. So, payroll and benefits. This is look at the note that I have down here. Look at your repairs and maintenance budget. Payroll and benefits should be about $1,000 per unit per year. When I first got started in this business, we were able to see some expenses as low as $700 per unit per year. $1,000 per unit per year is probably only good for the next year. And I'm saying this right now, we are in 2014. So if you're listening to this tape, this recording tape, if you're listening to this recording, a year or 2 years from 2014, I can only imagine what Obamacare is going to do to the payroll and benefits costs for these properties. So $1,000 is more likely going to be $1,200 in the next year. All right, so just keep that in mind when you're starting to look at these things. Now, here's the real key. Look at your repair and maintenance budget. If your repair and maintenance budget is really high, like hitting that 800 mark, maybe hitting even higher, your payroll and benefits expense should be at this high end or even higher as well. Because remember, the repairs and maintenance is the budget for what your guys who are working on your property are going down to HD Supply or Home Depot every day to pick up more supplies to go back and fix work orders. And if you're spending $1,000 per unit per year for repairs and maintenance, you need a lot of staff to take care of that. And if these people are if you're looking at a payroll and benefits expense of $800 per unit per year, it just doesn't jive. Those two numbers just don't make sense. You know how I said a property is a living, breathing entity? Well, it's got to live and it's got to breathe the right way. And if your repair and maintenance budget is huge, but your payroll is low, who's making all the fixes? Something's not right. Now, you might be thinking to yourself there that, oh, well, no, you don't understand. What you're not taking into consideration are contract services. The contractors are coming in to do that work. Well, you know what? That falls under the contractor budget. I'm just talking about repairs and maintenance. I'm talking about what it takes for my guys to run that property, not what a third-party contractor is going to come in and do. So always take that into consideration, that these numbers all have to match up together. So if your repairs and maintenance budget is high, your payroll should be high as well. Now, marketing. What's your marketing costs? Well, what's the rule of thumb? It's between $25 per unit per year to $100 per unit per year. And I can tell you, folks, on my properties, it's zero. I don't spend anything for marketing. And the properties fill up very nicely. There are so many ways to get free marketing in this business that you really don't even need to pay. But typically, if you're looking to buy a property, you're going to try to, budget for things and keep the NOI as low as possible. So you're going to put numbers in there for the marketing. And that number depends upon what's going on the property. Is it 95% occupied? Well, if it's 95% occupied, why would you spend $100 per unit per year on marketing? You got no product to sell. Why would you spend that much on marketing? But if you're at 60% vacancy or occupancy or 40% vacancy, why are you only spending $25 per unit per year on marketing? You better get out there and start pounding the pavement and coming up with ways to get people in the door. So you're going to be spending that $100 per unit per year. So those are the, I mean, I've seen, I was looking at a property just the other day. The marketing budget was like $300 per unit per year. It didn't make any sense. And the property was 97% occupied. Didn't make any sense whatsoever. It was a beautiful, beautiful Class A property. And those were what the numbers were coming back at. Something was wrong. It wasn't passing the sniff test. Okay. Now, we talked about contract services a little bit ago, and typically contract services can be anywhere between $200 to $600 per unit per year. But here's the thing you need to understand. What types of services do you need to contract out for on that particular property? Every property is going to be different. So you got to understand what's going on in that property to understand, am I at the low end of the spectrum for the contract services, or am I at the high end of the spectrum? You know, you got to look at things like, is there an elevator? Well, if there's an elevator, there's going to be an elevator contract. Do they have a pool? Do they maintain the pool themselves, or do they have a service come in and do the pool for them? Is there a lot of landscaping, or is it all cement, cemented over? Is there, a lot of landscaping, no landscaping? Is there snow removal? I'm telling you right now, this global warming thing has not impacted apartment owners yet. I can tell you that for a fact. So do you need to pay a lot for snow removal, or do you outsource that? I mean, I can tell you right now, I bought a property up in Michigan, and first 2 years I owned it, we spent $27,000 in snow removal and salt to a third-party contractor. And then we went out, I told my maintenance person, my manager, I said, we can't afford this anymore. This is killing the property. We got to do something. She goes, okay, I'll go on Craigslist and see what I can come up with. She calls me back for $7,000. We bought a truck with a plow and a sander on the back for $7,000. And the next 3 years, it never snowed. And that's my good luck charm, is that $7,000 truck. Thing is disgusting, but you know what? It keeps the snow off the property. That's all I care about. So understand what the contract services are that are needed on that property, and then figure it out. If you're seeing that you can't figure out where are all these contract services going to, and they're at the high end of the spectrum, $600 per unit per year, something isn't jiving. You got to get more of the story behind it. And let me tell you something else, folks. Here's a rule of thumb. If you're looking at the property, in the last couple of months, they have not spent a dime on pest control or termite control, they're broke. They don't have any money. And don't believe for a second that it doesn't have a pest control or termite problem. Every apartment complex I've ever worked with has some type of a pest control or termite issue. It just happens. And when the property is broke and it can't pay its bills, that's the first one that gets cut. So if you don't see that bill being expended, there's something wrong with the property. Just keep that in mind. Now, final one that I want to talk about is, before we get into a real-life example, is what do you do about taxes? You had better know what taxes do in that jurisdiction, in that taxing jurisdiction, if you're going to start analyzing deals. You need to know if the assessor bases his numbers on the sales price, or whether he bases it on his assessment that he does, or his reval that he does every so often, and when's the next time it's going to happen. You need to know that, because you don't want to be in a jurisdiction that bases it upon sales price, and then you go and you sign up the you go to the assessor's office and you find out that the guy has the property assessed for $1 million, and you're paying $3 million for the property. And so if you do that, your analysis should triple your taxes. And so you should figure out what your NOI is based upon 3 times what the current taxes are. And the broker's going to scream bloody murder and say, you can't do that. No, it doesn't work that way. See, what happens is, even if they do base it upon the sales price, they're going to come back and they're going to revalue down, so you're back in line with everybody else in the neighborhood. So don't worry about that. That won't happen. And you know, what he told you is true to a certain degree. The way it really will happen is you'll buy that property for $3 million. It was assessed for $1 million. The tax assessor catches wind of your $3 million purchase price. He will triple your taxes, and then he'll say, best of luck to you at the reval in front of the Board of Assessors and in front of the tax tribunal. And you will file a suit against the assessors to try to get that number back down to that $1 million that the broker told you it was going to go back down to. But it's going to take you 2 years to do it, and you better be able to afford that triple increase in your taxes for the next 2 years, because if you can't afford it, you lose your seat at the tax tribunal. So that's what you need to understand. If the taxing area is one where they base it upon sales price, your analysis had better be based upon the sales price and not what the current taxes are. So if whatever jurisdiction you're looking in, you had better be an expert on how the taxes work. All right? Now, let me give you an example. And this is actually a pretty close to a real-life example that just came across my desk the other day. A potential client sent me over this deal and said, hey, can you just take a look at this and tell me what you think? Now, remember, the whole purpose of this conversation is to teach you how to evaluate these things in 5 minutes. Now, this one took me 30 seconds. And it's going to be able to take you 30 seconds too once you understand these rules of thumb and how they all work. Take a look at this property. Now, understand, I don't know anything about this property. I don't know if it's a Class A, B, C, or D. I don't know. I don't know the property type, but here they're telling me that the expense ratio on this property, and I'm not kidding you folks, this is the extent of the analysis. The expense ratio is 15.5%. Okay, let's take what we learned here tonight. Take the 15.5% and tell me what property type has an expense ratio of 15.5%. Can you remember? You want to know what the address of this property is? Okay, the address of this property is 123 Main Street in Proformia. It doesn't exist. Remember, I never gave you any type of property that had an expense ratio at 15.5%. I'm telling you, folks, I told you 35% was the top end of the Class A property, and I'll tell you, you got to run a pretty tight ship to even get to 35% expense ratio. So there's no possible way that this property could possibly run in 15.5% expense ratio. I don't care what the property type is. It doesn't matter to me. This type of property can only exist in Proformia. So what do? You go back in and you recreate the numbers based upon the rules of thumb that I gave you. And then you recreate the financials and you come up with a much more accurate expense ratio based upon the specific type of property. Then you go back and you create, you figure out what the cap rate is, and you'll be able to figure out what the purchase price is. Now, based upon the numbers and the purchase price that company was asking for, this little cream puff of a property was trading at a 17% cap rate. You see how crazy these numbers are right now? I mean, a perfectly rehab property at 17% cap rate, but it's only showing a 15.5% expense ratio. It just doesn't make sense. Now, let's take another scenario, and in this particular case, what if it's an all bills paid property and the expense ratio is 55%? What do we know about this property? What do we say to the broker about this property? Well, we know that an all bills paid property tends to be a C-class asset, right? That's what we know about C-class properties. That was my my absolute rule, even though there are no absolutes. All bills paid properties tend to be C-class properties. C-class properties tend to have an expense ratio of what? 61% to 75%. This property is showing up with an expense ratio of 55%. What do we know? There's something wrong with this property. We need to then go back into the expenses and start to break them down and figure out what's wrong with the expenses, because it's very, very, very unlikely that a C-class property that's all bills paid is running at a 55% expense ratio. You know what? Maybe it is because they're running on a cash accounting basis and the seller isn't paying his bills. Well, that doesn't bode well for the property. That's not a true breakdown or analysis of what the property's worth. So you've got to go back in there and you've got to fix it. So what you need to do is you need to understand that you can look at any property package and you apply these rules and these expense ratios, and you know right away whether it's a good deal or there's something wrong with that deal. So folks, that's really it. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions, make sure that you can shoot me an email to info@multifamilyinvestingacademy.com. I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. Also, don't forget that you can go and check out on the multifamilyinvestingacademy.com homepage, click on events, and our next event, we have 2 events coming up, the Multifamily Shark Tank. If you don't know what that is and you happen to be in the Baltimore area or the Anaheim area for those dates, you want to come out to this. It's a 3-day training seminar. You can read all about it click on the links that you'll see on the web page, and you can find out exactly what we do. The whole idea is that you get trained in the first 2 days, and then I bring in some of my clients who are investors, some of my clients that are looking to do deals, and for those people that may have a deal under contract, they're about to put a deal under contract, they're looking for a partner, they're looking for cash, they can come up on the last day, and we put them into the Shark Tank, and they try to pitch their deal to the sponsors. It is the most educational experience you will ever get in this business. You'll definitely want to come out and see that. We got 2 of them coming up in the next couple of months, and then also, as I said, click on the events tab, the Shark Tank tab, or the MFIA Mastermind tab, and you'll get a full understanding of what we have to offer. We are here to teach you how to do this business the right way. It is the best business to be in, I am firmly convinced. But the thing is, if you do your first deal wrong, you'll never do a second deal, and we want to make sure that you do your first deal correctly. So I want to thank everybody. We had a huge turnout today, an absolutely huge turnout. Thank you all so much for coming. This will be available to those people in the Mastermind program as a replay, and we will talk to you in 2 weeks' time. You can go also to the events page. You can see what the topic is going to be in 2 weeks. And you can meet us for that same time, same place. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.